The desert wind carried secrets that morning, whispering across the tarmac of Kandahar airfield like a dying breath. Staff Sergeant Kiera Raven Blackwood stood motionless beside her A-10 Thunderbolt II, her weathered hands tracing the fresh bullet holes that peppered the aircraft's titanium bathtub. Something was wrong. The holes weren't random. They formed a deliberate pattern, almost like a signature. In her 12 years of flying close air support missions, she'd never seen anything like it. The mystery deepened when she noticed the trajectory angles. Whoever had fired these rounds knew exactly where an A-10's vulnerable spots were. This wasn't Taliban's small arms fire or lucky RPG fragments. This was precision work, the kind that required intimate knowledge of American aircraft design, the kind that suggested an insider's touch. "Jesus, Raven, your bird looks like Swiss cheese," called out Captain Marcus Webb, her squadron mate, as he approached with his morning coffee steaming in the Afghan dawn. His easy grin faltered when he saw her expression. "What's eating at you?" Kiera's pale blue eyes, marked by crow's feet from squinting against desert glare, remained fixed on the damage pattern. Her auburn hair, streaked with premature gray, was pulled back in the regulation bun that had become her trademark. The scars on her forearms, souvenirs from an IED blast in Iraq 3 years prior, caught the morning light as she pointed to the holes. "Look at the spacing, Webb. Look at the angles." Her voice carried the weight of experience, each word measured and deliberate. "This isn't random. Someone knows our aircraft better than they should." The base was already stirring to life around them. Crew chiefs began their pre-flight inspections, their voices mixing with the distant hum of generators and the occasional roar of an F-16 taking off for dawn patrol. But Kiera heard none of it. Her focus was entirely on the mystery before her, the puzzle that would soon pull her into something far more dangerous than routine CAS missions. In the distance, a figure watched from behind a maintenance hangar. Through binoculars, they observed the woman pilot's methodical examination of the damage, nodding her careful attention to detail, her obvious experience in reading the story that bullet holes could tell. A slight smile played across the observer's lips. She was exactly as advertised, competent, thorough, and completely unaware of what was coming. The observer lowered the binoculars and pulled out a secure satellite phone. 3 rings, then a gruff voice answered. "It's confirmed," the observer said quietly. "She's the one. Raven's found the breadcrumbs. The game begins now." As the sun climbed higher over the Hindu Kush Mountains, casting long shadows across the airfield, Kiera Blackwood continued her investigation, unaware that she had just become the central piece in a deadly puzzle that would test everything she thought she knew about loyalty, betrayal, and the true cost of war. The wind died to nothing, and in that sudden silence the desert held its breath. Major General Patricia Hayes materialized from the morning haze like a mirage, her dress blues immaculate despite the Afghan dust that coated everything else on base. The stars on her collar caught the sunlight as she approached, and Kiera could see the barely contained fury in her movements. This was not a social visit. "Sergeant Blackwood," Hayes' voice cut through the ambient noise of the flight line like a blade. "My office, now." The walk across the base felt like a death march. Other personnel stepped aside as they passed, sensing the tension that radiated from the general like heat from an engine. Kiera's mind raced through the possibilities. The damaged A-10, the mysterious bullet patterns, the careful examination she'd been conducting. Somehow, she'd stepped into something bigger than a simple maintenance issue. Hayes' office was sparse, functional. A single photo of her family sat on the metal desk beside stacks of classified reports. The general closed the door with deliberate care, then turned to face Kiera with eyes that had seen too many wars. "Sit down, Raven." The use of her call sign instead of rank was telling. This conversation was about to become very personal, very quickly. "What did you find on your aircraft this morning?" Kiera remained standing, her posture military perfect. "Ma'am, I observed damage patterns inconsistent with standard enemy small arms fire. The bullet holes suggest intimate knowledge of A-10 vulnerabilities and I didn't ask for your analysis, Sergeant. I asked what you found. Hayes moved to the window, her gaze fixed on something beyond the perimeter fence. Because what you found is going to get you killed if you're not very, very careful. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Outside, an Apache helicopter thundered overhead, its rotors beating a rhythm that matched Kiera's accelerating heartbeat. She'd flown with Hayes before, back when the general was still a colonel leading combat missions over Baghdad. They'd shared foxholes, shared fears, shared the kind of trust that only came from facing death together. There's a traitor on this base, Raven. Hayes turned back to her, and Kiera saw something she'd never seen before in her commanding officer's eyes: genuine fear. Someone with access to classified aircraft specifications, mission briefings, and flight plans. Someone who's been feeding information to insurgent forces for months. The pieces began clicking together in Kiera's mind. The recent increase in accurate ground fire during CAS missions. The way enemy forces seemed to anticipate their attack patterns. The growing casualty rates among close air support pilots. The bullet holes on your aircraft weren't from combat, Sergeant. They were placed there deliberately. Someone wanted you to find them, wanted you to start asking questions. Hayes moved closer, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. They're using you as bait. Kiera felt the familiar sensation of target lock, that moment when everything crystallized into deadly focus. But this time, she was the target, and the hunter was someone she trusted, someone who wore the same uniform, someone who had sworn the same oath. "What do you need me to do, General?" Hayes smiled grimly, the expression of a commander about to ask the impossible. "I need you to catch a ghost." The mission briefing took place in a SCIF buried deep beneath the administrative buildings, a concrete tomb where secrets went to multiply in the darkness. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the faces of the assembled personnel, each one carefully vetted, each one carrying pieces of a puzzle that none of them could see completely. Kiera sat at the metal table, her hands folded, her expression neutral despite the storm building in her chest. Across from her sat Colonel James Reacher, the base intelligence officer whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his effectiveness. His pale gray eyes reminded her of winter mornings back home in Montana, cold and unforgiving. "Operation Ghost Hunt," Reacher began, his voice carrying the weight of classified authority. "For the past 6 months, we've lost 17 aircraft and 31 personnel to what appeared to be increasingly sophisticated enemy fire. Statistical analysis suggests enemy forces have detailed knowledge of our aircraft vulnerabilities, flight patterns, and mission parameters." A series of photographs appeared on the wall-mounted screen: aircraft wreckage, casualty reports, intelligence intercepts. Each image told a story of betrayal measured in blood and twisted metal. "The traitor has access to classified maintenance schedules, pilot assignments, and tactical communications. They know when we fly, where we fly, and how we fly." Reacher's finger traced patterns on the table as he spoke, unconscious movements that revealed his frustration. "They've turned our own expertise against us." Kiera studied the faces around the table. Major Sandra Liu, the squadron operations officer whose husband had been killed in one of the suspicious shootdowns. Captain Rodriguez from maintenance, whose crews had been working overtime to keep damaged aircraft operational. Technical Sergeant Brown from communications, whose encrypted radio systems had somehow been compromised. One of them was the enemy. One of them had been playing a longer game than anyone realized. "Sergeant Blackwood," Reacher's attention focused on her like a laser sight. "You've been selected for this operation because of your unique qualifications. You're experienced enough to be credible but junior enough to be overlooked. Your maintenance background gives you access to areas and information that might reveal our traitors' methods." The weight of the assignment settled on her shoulders like lead blankets. She was being asked to become a living target, to expose herself to an enemy who had already proven their willingness to kill American service members without hesitation. The damaged aircraft was Stage 1. Hayes interjected from her position near the door. We needed to draw them out to make them believe their cover was being investigated. Now they'll be watching you, waiting to see what you discover. Kiera nodded slowly, understanding the deadly chess game she was about to enter. What's my cover for status? Business as usual, Reacher replied. Continue your normal flight operations, conduct routine maintenance inspections, interact normally with base personnel, but document everything. Every conversation, every access request, every piece of information that passes through your hands. The meeting concluded with operational parameters, communication protocols, and contingency plans that no one expected to need but everyone hoped would be sufficient. As the others filed out, Hayes lingered behind. Kiera, the general said quietly, using her first name for the first time in years. Be careful who you trust. The enemy we're hunting isn't just betraying military secrets, they're betraying family. The night sky over Afghanistan held 10,000 secrets, each star a witness to the countless dramas playing out across the war-torn landscape below. Kiera stood on the flight line, ostensibly conducting a routine post-flight inspection of her repaired, but actually serving as bait for a predator she couldn't identify. The aircraft looked different now, whole again after the maintenance crews had patched the mysterious bullet holes. But the scars remained in her memory, a puzzle whose solution might cost her life. She ran her hands along the fuselage, feeling for imperfections, listening to the subtle sounds that would tell her if anything had been tampered with during the repair process. Working late again, I see. The voice came from behind her, casual but carrying an undertone she couldn't quite place. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the shadows between aircraft, his maintenance coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid and desert dust. In the harsh sodium lights of the flight line, his face looked gaunt, older than his 35 years. Can't sleep, she replied truthfully, though not for the reasons he might assume. Figured I'd make sure everything's squared away for tomorrow's mission. Rodriguez moved closer, his movements careful, deliberate. Mind if I take a look? Sometimes the night shift misses things. He produced a flashlight and began examining the repaired sections with professional efficiency. Too much efficiency, perhaps, for someone who hadn't been involved in the original repairs. Kiera watched him work, cataloging every movement, every expression, every word. The intelligence briefing had emphasized that their traitor was likely someone with intimate knowledge of aircraft systems and access to maintenance records. Rodriguez fit that profile perfectly, but then again, so did half the people on base. Whoever shot up your bird knew exactly what they were aiming for, he said, running his finger along the repaired wing route. These weren't random hits. They were going for specific systems. That's what I thought too, she replied carefully, testing his reaction. Makes you wonder where they got their intelligence. Something flickered across his face, fear, guilt, or maybe just exhaustion. There's a lot of bad information floating around out there. Taliban fighters who have been watching us for years, learning our patterns. He straightened up, meeting her eyes directly. But you know that already. You've been flying these missions longer than most. The conversation felt like a dance, each partner trying to lead while hiding their true intentions. Kiera found herself studying Rodriguez's hands as he worked, steady, confident, familiar with every rivet and access panel. Hands that could easily sabotage aircraft systems or place tracking devices. I heard they're bringing in some counterintelligence people, she said, watching for his reaction. Looking for security leaks. About time, he replied, but his movements became more hurried, less precise. We've lost too many good people to coincidence. A helicopter passed overhead, its navigation lights blinking red and green against the star field. The sound faded into the distance, leaving them in relative silence broken only by the hum of generators and the distant murmur of voices from the operations center. "I should let you get back to your inspection," Rodriguez said, already backing away. "See you at the morning brief." As he disappeared into the maze of parked aircraft, Kiera felt the familiar weight of being watched. Somewhere in the darkness, eyes were following her movements, analyzing her behavior, trying to determine if she posed a threat to carefully laid plans. She continued her inspection with practiced thoroughness, but her mind was elsewhere, piecing together fragments of information, trying to separate paranoia from legitimate suspicion. The enemy was close, close enough to touch, close enough to trust, close enough to kill. Dawn came like a revelation across the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Kiera of the maple forests back home. But there was no peace in this sunrise, only the promise of another day spent hunting shadows and being hunted in return. The morning brief was routine in its abnormality: target coordinates, weather updates, intelligence summaries that revealed nothing and hinted at everything. Kiera sat in the back row, ostensibly reviewing her mission notes but actually observing the faces around her, searching for tells that might reveal which of her comrades was feeding information to the enemy. Major Liu delivered the intelligence briefing with her usual precision, her voice betraying nothing of the personal pain that Kiera knew she carried. Her husband's death 3 months ago had been attributed to sophisticated enemy air defenses, but now that loss carried darker implications. "Enemy activity in Grid Square 77 remains elevated," Liu reported, her laser pointer tracing patterns on the digital map. "Ground forces report increased coordination between Taliban elements, suggesting improved communication networks." Improved communications that might be enhanced by inside information, Kiera thought, watching Liu's controlled movements. The Major had access to every mission brief, every target package, every piece of intelligence that crossed the base. She also had motive. Grief could drive people to unexpected extremes. Captain Webb raised his hand. "Any update on the new air defense systems? Intelligence suggested they might be getting more sophisticated equipment." "Negative at this time," Liu replied, but Kiera caught a micro-expression that suggested there was more to that story. "Continue standard evasion protocols and maintain situational awareness." The brief concluded with individual mission assignments. Kiera's task was straightforward: close air support for a convoy moving through the Kunar Valley, a routine milk run that should be completed by noon. But nothing was routine anymore, not when every mission might be compromised before it began. As the pilots filed out, discussing tactics and contingencies, Kiera lingered behind to examine the mission planning materials. Technical Sergeant Brown, the communications specialist, was breaking down the briefing equipment with methodical efficiency. "Hell of a thing," Brown said without preamble, nodding toward the map display. "Losing so many aircraft in such a short time makes you wonder if someone's selling us out." The comment was casual, conversational, but Kiera detected an undercurrent of genuine concern. Brown had been responsible for maintaining the secure communications that kept aircraft in contact with ground forces and each other. If someone was intercepting those communications, Brown would be the logical person to notice the security breach. "You think it's possible?" Kiera asked, settling into the role of concerned squadron mate. "Someone on the inside feeding information." Brown paused in his equipment breakdown, his hands stilling on the encryption module he'd been securing. "I've been monitoring our comm security for 8 years, he said quietly. "Never seen anything like this. The enemy's responding to our communications almost before we finish transmitting them." "What do you mean?" "Yesterday, flight lead called for a frequency change at 8:47 hours. At 8:49, ground forces intercepted enemy radio traffic discussing the new frequency." Brown's expression was grim. Either they're psychic or someone's feeding them real-time information. The implications hit Kiera like a physical blow. Real-time intelligence meant the traitor wasn't just providing general information. They were actively monitoring and reporting mission details as operations unfolded. The level of access required for that kind of intelligence suggested someone at the very heart of operational planning. "Have you reported this?" she asked. "Through proper channels," Brown replied, but his tone suggested frustration with the response he'd received. Hard to prove without compromising operational security. As Kiera walked toward the flight line for her pre-flight preparations, she carried with her a growing sense of urgency. The enemy wasn't just one step ahead. They were operating in real time, adapting to American tactics as they were executed. Somewhere on this base, someone was watching, listening, and reporting every detail of their operations to forces that wanted nothing more than to see American aircraft burning in the desert sand. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the tarmac like a predator at rest, its gray camouflage paint scheme broken by the bright yellow, inert markings on its training ordnance. Kiera completed her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments, but today every action felt weighted with additional significance. As she checked control surfaces and examined engine intakes, she was acutely aware of being observed. Ground crews moved about their duties with professional efficiency, but she caught several furtive glances, quick looks that lasted just long enough to gather information before moving on. The paranoia was becoming infectious, spreading through her consciousness like a virus. "Raven, you ready for some easy flying today?" Staff Sergeant Monica Chen, her dedicated crew chief, approached with a maintenance log and a concerned expression. Chen had been maintaining Kiera's aircraft for 2 years, long enough to develop the kind of professional intimacy that made sabotage nearly impossible to hide. "As ready as I ever am," Kiera replied, accepting the log and reviewing the previous night's maintenance actions. Everything appeared normal: routine service, standard inspections, no anomalies reported. But normalcy itself had become suspect. Chen lowered her voice, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "There's something you should know about last night. Around 200, someone accessed your aircraft with proper authorization codes, spent about 30 minutes in the cockpit, claimed they were updating navigation systems." Kiera's blood chilled. Navigation systems were controlled through secure networks, and updates required specialized equipment that wasn't typically available to unauthorized personnel. Who was it? Authorization came through proper channels, but Chen hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the implications of what she was about to say. "I've never seen the technician before. New face, claimed to be temporary assignment from Bagram. Had all the right paperwork, knew all the right procedures." "What did they update?" "That's what bothers me," Chen replied, producing a tablet with the aircraft's electronic logs. "According to the system, no updates were made. No software changes, no database modifications, no hardware replacements. 30 minutes in your cockpit and officially nothing happened." The pieces of a deadly puzzle were beginning to take shape in Kiera's mind. Someone with access to proper authorization codes and knowledge of maintenance procedures had spent significant time alone with her aircraft. Time enough to plant tracking devices, install surveillance equipment, or worse, sabotage critical systems in ways that wouldn't be immediately apparent. "Did you get a good look at this technician?" she asked. Chen nodded grimly. About 5'8", average build, wearing standard maintenance coveralls with appropriate patches and identification. But there was something about the way they moved, like they knew exactly what they were looking for. "Man or woman?" "Hard to tell with the coveralls and cap, but I'd guess male. Kept their head down, avoided direct eye contact with security cameras." Chen paused, then added quietly, "Professional enough to make me think they'd done this before." As if summoned by their conversation, Captain Rodriguez appeared from around the aircraft's nose, maintenance clipboard in hand and a casual smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning, ladies. How's our bird looking today?" The timing was too convenient, the approach too casual. Kiera found herself studying Rodriguez with new suspicion, noting the way his gaze moved across the aircraft, the subtle tension in his posture, the careful modulation of his voice. "Everything looks good," Chen replied, but Kiera caught the slight emphasis on looks that suggested deeper concerns. "Should be ready for mission tasking." Rodriguez nodded approvingly, making notes on his clipboard with movements that seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. "Good to hear. We can't afford any more maintenance delays with the operational tempo we're maintaining." He moved on to examine other aircraft, but not before Kiera noticed him glance back at her cockpit with an expression that might have been concern, curiosity, or something darker. The weight of suspicion was becoming unbearable, transforming every interaction into a potential threat assessment. As she climbed into the cockpit and began her startup procedures, Kiera realized that the real enemy wasn't hiding in mountain caves or desert compounds. The enemy was here, among them, wearing the same uniform and sharing the same dangers, but serving a different master entirely. The Pratt & Whitney TF-34 engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, filling the cockpit with familiar vibrations that usually brought comfort but now felt ominous. Kiera ran through her checklist with automatic precision, while her mind worked through the implications of the midnight maintenance visit. "Kandahar Tower, Raven 11 requesting taxi for departure," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her consciousness. "Raven 11, Kandahar Tower, taxi to runway 23 right, wind 240 at 12, altimeter 3002. The routine communications felt different now, weighted with the knowledge that enemy ears might be listening, analyzing, reporting. Every transmission was potentially compromising operational security. Every response might be feeding information to forces that wanted her dead. As she taxied toward the active runway, Kiera noticed Technical Sergeant Brown in the control tower, his attention focused on the communications equipment rather than the aircraft movement below. Was he merely doing his job, or was he simultaneously transmitting her departure information to hostile forces? The takeoff was routine, the Warthog climbing into the bright Afghan sky with the steady reliability that made it legendary among ground forces. But as Kiera leveled off at 15,000 feet and turned toward her assigned patrol area, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was flying into a trap. "Hammer Base, Raven 11, airborne and proceeding to area of operations Falcon," she reported, following standard communication protocols that suddenly felt like painting a target on her aircraft. "Raven 11, Hammer Base, copy airborne. Be advised, ground units report possible hostile activity in your area. Maintain heightened awareness." The warning should have been reassuring, evidence that intelligence systems were working to protect her mission. Instead, it felt like confirmation that someone, somewhere, knew exactly where she was going and what she was planning to do. The Kunar Valley spread below her like a three-dimensional map, its brown and green terrain hiding countless secrets among the ridges and ravines. Somewhere down there, Taliban fighters might already be positioning themselves based on intelligence provided by the traitor back at Kandahar. "Raven 11, this is Hammer 26, came a new voice over the radio, the ground unit she was supporting. "We're moving through phase line Delta, could use some eyes on the ridgeline to our north." Kiera banked toward the reported position, her targeting pod scanning the terrain below. The thermal imaging revealed the heat signatures of the friendly convoy moving through the valley floor, their vehicles creating small white dots against the cooler background. But something was wrong with the picture. The spacing between vehicles was too regular, the route selection too predictable. Either the convoy commander was inexperienced, or someone had provided the enemy with enough advance notice to prepare a sophisticated ambush. The tactical situation that should have been routine was beginning to feel like the opening moves in a deadly chess game where she was both player and pawn. As she established her orbit over the convoy, scanning for threats that might already know she was coming, Kiera realized that the enemy she was hunting had turned her into the hunted. Every mission now carried the additional burden of uncertainty, not just about enemy capabilities, but about the reliability of her own intelligence and the loyalty of her own comrades. The sky above the Kunar Valley was deceptively peaceful, painted in shades of blue that reminded Kiera of summer afternoons in Montana. But beneath that tranquil facade lay the potential for sudden, violent death, and she no longer knew whether that threat would come from enemy forces in the mountains below or from the betrayal of someone she trusted. The ambush came with the precision of a Swiss watch, unfolding in seconds that felt like hours as Kiera's world exploded into chaos and betrayal. The first indication was a brief glint of sunlight, reflecting off metal from a ridge position that intelligence had cleared as unoccupied. Her combat instincts screamed danger even before her threat warning systems began their deadly chorus. Raven 1-1, break left. Sam, launch from your 2 o'clock. The warning came from Hammer 2-6 on the ground, but it was already too late. The shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile was tracking perfectly, its guidance system locked onto her aircraft's heat signature with the kind of accuracy that suggested intimate knowledge of A-10 vulnerabilities. Kiera threw her aircraft into a violent evasive maneuver, pulling G-forces that pressed her deep into her ejection seat while dispensing flares and chaff in a desperate attempt to confuse the incoming missile. The Warthog responded like the combat veteran it was, its titanium bathtub designed to absorb punishment that would destroy lesser aircraft. The explosion came close enough to rattle her teeth, shrapnel peppering the right wing and engine nacelle with a sound like violent hail. Warning lights illuminated her instrument panel like a Christmas tree, but the engines continued running and the flight controls remained responsive. She was hurt but not finished. Raven 1-1, Hammer Base, say status, came the urgent call from the operations center back at Kandahar. Raven 1-1 has taken a hit but remains mission capable, she responded, fighting to keep her voice steady while assessing the damage. Engaging hostile position now. What happened next would replay in her mind for years to come. As she rolled in on the enemy position, her targeting pod revealed not just the missile launcher, but an entire coordinated ambush site. Machine gun nests positioned with perfect fields of fire, mortar tubes pre-ranged for maximum effect against the convoy below, and communications equipment that looked far too sophisticated for a typical Taliban cell. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a carefully orchestrated trap that had required detailed advanced knowledge of the convoy's route, timing, and escort procedures. Someone had provided the enemy with everything they needed to achieve maximum tactical advantage. Hammer 2-6, Raven 1-1, you've got approximately 15 hostiles in prepared positions along the northern ridge. Recommend immediate withdrawal to covered positions while I work the problem. But even as she transmitted the warning, Kiera realized the terrible truth. The convoy below was moving in a pattern that seemed almost designed to maximize their exposure to enemy fire. Vehicle spacing was wrong, route selection was predictable, and their response to her warning was sluggish, as if they were following a predetermined script rather than reacting to genuine tactical threats. The 30 MGAU-8 Avenger cannon spoke with its distinctive roar, sending depleted uranium rounds downrange at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. The enemy position erupted in explosions and flying debris, but not before Kiera noticed something that chilled her to the bone. Some of the equipment she was destroying bore American markings. Raven 1-1, this is Hammer Base, came a new voice over the radio, calm and professional despite the chaos erupting in the valley below. Be advised, we're showing multiple friendly casualties from your gun run. The words hit her like a physical blow. Friendly casualties. She'd been targeting what appeared to be enemy positions, but somehow American personnel had been caught in her fire. Either the intelligence was catastrophically wrong, or someone had deliberately positioned friendly forces in her target area. Hammer Base, Raven 1-1. I was engaging clearly identified hostile positions. Request immediate clarification on friendly force locations. The silence that followed lasted only seconds but felt like hours. When the response finally came, it carried implications that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Raven 1-1, return to base immediately. You are being recalled from mission. As she turned toward Kandahar, trailing smoke from her damaged engine, and carrying the weight of uncertainty about what she just witnessed, Kiera realized that the enemy they were hunting had just played their most devastating card. They hadn't just betrayed operational intelligence. They'd manipulated her into a position where she might have fired on friendly forces. The return flight to Kandahar felt like flying through a nightmare where nothing was what it seemed, and every shadow might conceal another betrayal. Kiera nursed her damaged A-10 through the thin mountain air, the right engine running rough, and the flight controls requiring constant attention. But the mechanical problems were secondary to the tactical situation unfolding in her mind. The radio chatter told a story of confusion and conflicting information. Ground units were reporting casualties, but the reports were inconsistent, some claiming enemy dead, others suggesting friendly fire incidents, still others indicating a complete breakdown in communication between different elements of the operation. Raven 1-1, Kandahar approach, we have emergency equipment standing by. Report your status and intentions. Kandahar approach, Raven 1-1, minor battle damage, aircraft controllable, requesting straighten approach to runway 23 right. Her voice remained steady, the product of years of training and experience, but inside she was fighting a battle between duty and growing suspicion. As the airfield came into view, she could see the emergency vehicles positioned along the runway, fire trucks, ambulances, security personnel. Standard procedure for a battle-damaged aircraft, but today even routine safety measures felt ominous, as if she were flying into another carefully prepared trap. The landing was rougher than usual, the damaged aircraft requiring extra attention to maintain directional control, but she managed to bring the Warthog to a stop without further incident. As she completed the shutdown checklist, she could see ground crews and investigators already approaching, their movements quick and purposeful. Major General Hayes was waiting as Kiera climbed down from the cockpit, her expression unreadable but her posture suggesting barely controlled tension. Sergeant Blackwood, you need to come with me. Now. The walk to the debriefing room felt like a death march, every step measured and heavy with implications. Other personnel they passed watched with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something approaching suspicion. Word had apparently already spread about the mission, though exactly what version of events was being circulated remained unclear. The debriefing room was crowded with personnel she didn't recognize. Investigators, intelligence specialists, legal officers whose presence suggested that what had happened in the valley was being treated as something more serious than a routine combat engagement. Sergeant Blackwood, Colonel Reacher began without preamble, we need you to walk us through every detail of your mission, beginning with your takeoff from Kandahar. Take your time, be precise, and don't leave anything out. For the next 3 hours, she recounted every moment of the flight, every radio transmission, every tactical decision. The investigators listened with the intensity of surgeons, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting additional detail about specific aspects of the engagement. But as the debriefing progressed, Kiera began to realize that the questions were following a pattern that suggested the investigators already had a theory about what had happened, a theory that placed her at the center of a friendly fire incident that might have been the result of compromised intelligence, operational confusion, or worse. "Let me be very clear about something," she said finally, interrupting a line of questioning about her target identification procedures. "I engaged what appeared to be clearly identified hostile positions that were actively threatening friendly ground forces. If there were friendly casualties, it was because someone placed them in my target area without proper coordination." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. In the fluorescent lighting of the debriefing room, surrounded by investigators whose loyalty she couldn't assume, Kiera realized that she had become more than bait in a trap designed to catch a traitor. She had become the prime suspect in a friendly fire incident that might have been orchestrated by the very person they were trying to catch. The enemy had played the game with masterful precision, turning hunter into hunted with a single, devastating move. The holding cell wasn't actually a cell. It was a private room in the transient officer quarters with a guard posted outside, and orders that she was not to leave without escort. But the distinction felt academic as Kiera sat on the narrow bunk, staring at walls that had become the boundaries of her world while investigators decided whether she was a hero, a victim, or a war criminal. 3 days had passed since the incident in the Kunar Valley, and the official story kept changing. First reports suggested enemy casualties with possible friendly fire. Then the narrative shifted to suggest coordination failures between ground and air units. The latest version, whispered in corridors she was no longer allowed to walk freely, suggested that a rogue pilot had deliberately targeted friendly positions. Each iteration of the story moved further from the truth she remembered and closer to something that felt like carefully constructed fiction. Someone was controlling the narrative, shaping the official version of events to serve purposes she couldn't yet understand. Major General Hayes entered without knocking, her expression carrying the weight of command decisions that affected lives and careers. She dismissed the guard with a gesture and closed the door, creating the first truly private conversation Kiera had experienced since the incident. "They're going to charge you," Hayes said without preamble, settling into the room's single chair with the careful movements of someone carrying a heavy burden. "Negligent homicide, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, possibly treason." The words hit like physical blows, each charge representing not just legal consequences but the destruction of everything she'd worked to build over 12 years of service. "General, you know that's not what happened." "What I know and what I can prove are two different things," Hayes replied, her voice carrying frustration that went beyond professional disappointment. "The evidence they've assembled is compelling. Radio intercepts suggest you received targeting information from unauthorized sources. Forensic analysis of your aircraft shows modifications that could have been used to communicate with hostile forces. Witness statements place you in suspicious contact with known security risks." Kiera felt the walls closing in, not just the physical walls of the